It was early in the morning when it happened, again. The loud crash of splintering which shattered the quiet neighborhood peace. I stood frozen as Pamela Scott, our HOA president, drove her pristine white Jeep through my fence for the 5th time. Her perfect blonde hair bounced with every bump, and her eyes? Cold. Calculated. This wasn't just about property lines or landscaping rules anymore. It was personal. I used to be a chemical engineer, retired now, but some habits never fade. My garden was more than just plants. It was a patch of color in a sea of boring green lawns that all looked the same. To me, it was beautiful. To the HOA? A problem. But this wasn't even about the garden anymore. Pamela had been coming after me for months, over tiny tomato plants, an overnight truck, anything she could find. And then one morning, she showed up again, dressed in designer tennis clothes and swinging her Louis Vuitton bag like a weapon. She gave me 48 hours to trim bushes that weren't even overgrown yet. Said there was a new rule that started early. Funny thing? I hadn't received any email about it. She left quickly, but not before spotting those 2 little tomato plants I'd grown for my daughter Haley. Fruit-bearing plants are prohibited, she declared. Never mind, they were barely visible from the street. Rules are rules, she said, walking back to her Jeep like she hadn't just ruined someone's morning. Later that day, my neighbor Dorothy called. She'd seen everything. That woman is on a rampage, she told me. Last year, she ran the Ramirez family out because they hung a flag. Before that, the Chaudhurys moved because she complained about their cooking smells. I sighed. Dorothy was right. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. But I didn't want drama. I just wanted peace. So I told myself I'd adjust the garden, follow the rules, and move on. That was the plan until she actually drove through my fence. The sound woke me up one morning. Wood cracking, metal crunching. I rushed outside just in time to see Pamela standing next to her Jeep, feigning innocence. "Oh my," she said with fake concern. "I must have mixed up your house number." How unfortunate. Unbelievable. She thought I'd buy that lie. I knew better. She had aimed straight for my garden. And I had enough of this. My anger was rising, slow but steady. Maybe it was time I reminded people what happens when you mess with a retired chemical engineer. My daughter Haley, who's studying environmental law, urged me to stand up for myself. "Dad, you have rights," she said. I appreciated her fire, but I wasn't looking to start a war. Still, after seeing the damage and how easily the local police chief dismissed it, I realized something. If I didn't fight back, I'd be next on the list of families forced out by Pamela's reign of terror. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I got creative. I built a new fence, sturdy, white, and perfectly compliant with HOA standards. But hidden beneath its surface was something special. A custom paint formula I cooked up in my garage using old chemistry tricks from my military adhesives days. Non-toxic, legal, and nearly impossible to remove once it bonded with a vehicle's paint job. Haley helped me test it. We dropped a bit onto a piece of fabric, stirred it gently, and watched it change color. Permanent. Irreversible. Perfect. I painted the entire fence, installed motion sensors connected to my phone, and buried small spikes along the edge of my driveway, just in case Pamela tried another stunt. I wasn't looking to hurt anyone, but I wasn't going to let her walk all over me either. And sure enough, she came back. This time late at night, sneaking around with a spray can. I recorded everything. Then, out of nowhere, her husband Andrew appeared in his own car and plowed straight into my fence. Not by accident. Not by mistake. He hit it head-on, and boom, the trap activated. Hidden nozzles released a rainbow of colors across the front of her Jeep. Red, green, purple, fluorescent orange. It looked like a living graffiti masterpiece. Pamela stood there, stunned, watching her $70,000 car transform into something she couldn't fix with a simple car wash or detailing service. When the cops arrived, I calmly showed them the footage. Turns out, Andrew had come to stop her from planting fake evidence on my property, methamphetamine-looking items she planned to use during a surprise inspection. Things escalated fast. By the next morning, Pamela's father, William Scott, who practically owned half the town, was already trying to clean up the mess. But not before sending me a letter threatening fines for violating Clause 4.7 of the HOA agreement. Something about running a chemical lab in my home. This wasn't about fences or tomatoes anymore. This was full-blown war. And honestly, I was ready. News of the Rainbow Jeep incident spread through Maple Grove like wildfire. People whispered behind closed doors, laughed quietly when they saw her Mercedes parked in the garage. Some even sent secret nods of support. Dorothy told me the auto shops had refused to help her. They were too busy laughing at the sight of the permanently dyed SUV. Meanwhile, I kept collecting evidence. Recordings, inspector visits, suspicious HOA meetings. Every move they made, I documented it. Because I knew something they didn't. The more pressure they applied, the more mistakes they'd make. And mistakes were exactly what I needed. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in wearing a USB drive around my neck, a subtle reminder that I had everything backed up. Everything. When Pamela tried to push a new rule banning dangerous chemicals in homes, I pushed back with questions. Would that include bleach? Ammonia? A child's science kit? The room erupted into debate. For the first time, other homeowners started questioning the Scott family's grip on the community. And Pamela? She didn't like losing control. But I did. I liked it a lot. Because sometimes, the quietest people make the most effective revolutionaries. And Pamela Scott was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone's security alert. Rushing to check the app, I saw Pamela Scott herself creeping around my property under the cover of darkness. Her silhouette was unmistakable. Instead of confronting her directly, I watched through the cameras, curious about what she was up to. She moved carefully along the fence line, touching it at various points, measuring things with a small tape measure. It didn't take long for Haley to confirm what I suspected. She was scouting the best angle to crash into the fence again. I glanced toward the camera hidden in my garden light. The red indicator blinked. Someone was watching. I realized then that the real battle had only just begun. That night, the app pinged again. It was 11 p.m., and there she was, Pamela in her white Jeep Cherokee, slowly rolling down the street with her headlights off and the engine barely audible. Here we go, I whispered to myself, grabbing my phone and moving to the living room window without stepping outside. I started recording as Pamela got out of the car, dressed all in black this time instead of her usual tennis attire. In her hand was a spray paint can. "Oh no, you don't," I muttered, reaching for the police call button. But before I could connect the call, another vehicle appeared out of nowhere, Andrew's car. He came barreling down the street and straight toward my house, accelerating faster than seemed safe. "Pamela, no," Andrew shouted as he rolled down his window. But it was too late. With a deafening crash, the Jeep smashed through my new fence. Splinters flew everywhere. My trap was triggered instantly. Hidden nozzles released bursts of colorful paint across the front of the Jeep, drenching it in a rainbow explosion of red, green, purple, and fluorescent orange. Neighbors began waking up, peeking out their windows just in time to see the spectacle unfold. Pamela stood frozen, mouth agape, as the once pristine white Jeep transformed into a vibrant graffiti masterpiece. The paint reacted with the air, intensifying in color, permanently bonding with the surface. There was no washing that off. She turned to Andrew, who had stepped out of the now colorful vehicle, his face pale with shock. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "I was going to spray paint his fence, not crash into it," she defended herself. "I saw you with the bag," Andrew replied. "I thought you were planting something illegal in his yard. You drove into the fence on purpose? Are you insane?" Pamela screamed, looking down at her now hot pink-stained outfit. I stepped out onto my porch, phone still recording. "Another unfortunate accident, Mrs. Scott?" I asked, keeping my tone light but firm. "You did this to my car," she yelled, pointing at me. "It's changing colors." I smiled gently. "Just a little invention of mine. Polymer bonding paint. Permanently bonds with your Jeep's coating. Can't be washed off. Can't be buffed out. Can't even be painted over." Before she could respond, Police Chief Henry Wilson pulled up, clearly caught off guard by the surreal scene in front of him, the rainbow-colored Jeep, Pamela in hot pink clothes, Andrew looking like he'd seen a ghost, and me standing calmly on my porch with a phone in hand. She set a trap. Pamela shrieked as soon as Henry approached. "He deliberately destroyed my $70,000 car." Henry looked around, taking it all in. Then he spoke carefully. "Mrs. Scott, Mr. Reed has every right to protect his property, especially after the documented incidents we've already had." He paused, glancing at the Jeep, then at the spray can Pamela still clutched in her hand. "And if I understand correctly, you're here at 11:45 at night, dressed in black, with a spray paint can." Pamela turned on Andrew, fury blazing in her eyes. "You're useless. I told you not to follow me." But Andrew surprised us all. "You were going to plant fake drugs in his garden," he blurted out, his voice full of horror. "You bought items that look like methamphetamine to place in his garden before tomorrow's inspection." Silence fell over the group. "I think we need to go to the station," Henry finally said, his expression grave. As Pamela and Andrew were led away, I received a text from Haley asking if I was okay. I replied that I was fine, but maybe she should come by this weekend. The war had just begun. By morning, William Scott himself showed up at the police station to bail out his daughter. Pamela was released quickly, but Andrew stayed behind to sign paperwork. Before 9 a.m., I received a letter delivered by courier. "Dear Mr. Reed, the Maple Grove Homeowners Association has voted to inform you that operating a chemical laboratory in your home violates Clause 4.7 of the Restrictive Covenant. You have 48 hours to remove the equipment or face a $500 daily penalty. Regards, William Scott, Acting Chairman, Maple Grove HOA Board." I stared at the letter for a moment, then folded it and placed it on the kitchen table. This wasn't about fences or tomato plants anymore. This was all-out war. News of the Rainbow Jeep incident spread through Maple Grove like wildfire. Although no one dared openly support me for fear of the Scott family, I noticed sympathetic nods and secret smiles during my morning walks. Dorothy told me Pamela had to keep the Jeep in the garage and rent a Mercedes until she found a solution. The first auto body shop burst out laughing when she pulled in. The second called colleagues over just to see it. I smiled gently. I might feel sorry for her if she hadn't tried to frame me for drug dealing. That week, I received 5 different inspections from fire safety to wildlife control, checking for venomous snakes. It was clear the entire city machinery was being used to harass me into violating something. "This is harassment," Haley said over the phone. "I could file a lawsuit against her for this." "Not yet," I replied calmly. "I'm gathering information." The more they escalate, the more evidence they create. When a building inspector known to be close to William Scott came to check for poisonous snake breeding, I secretly recorded him admitting, William said, "Just find anything. He wants you out of the neighborhood." Friday evening brought the monthly HOA meeting. I knew William would use the forum to continue his campaign against me, but this time, I was ready. When I entered the meeting room, I wore a USB drive hanging from a chain around my neck, a subtle provocation I knew Pamela wouldn't miss. As predicted, her eyes locked onto it immediately. "Just scientific data," I said quietly as I walked past her. "Nothing to worry about." Her face shifted from smugness to concern in an instant. William opened the meeting with a deep, authoritative voice. The main topic, safety concerns and suspicious activity at certain properties. Pamela continued, proposing a new rule banning dangerous chemicals, scientific equipment, or materials that could be used illegally. I raised an eyebrow. "Could you define scientific equipment? Would that include my grandson's chemistry set or the microscope in my daughter's room?" Pamela blinked. Of course not. Children's toys. But how do you distinguish? I pressed. Would dangerous chemicals include bleach, ammonia, or oven cleaner? All are dangerous chemicals if misused. The room erupted into debate as other homeowners questioned the vague definitions. Eventually, Pamela lost patience and slammed the gavel. Enough. Mr. Reed is operating an illegal laboratory. I raised an eyebrow. Do you have evidence for that accusation, Mrs. Scott? Because that's defamation, and I could sue you. Pamela held up blurry photos taken through my windows, claiming they showed me working with illegal equipment. You've been spying on me? I asked, feigning surprise. That violates privacy laws, doesn't it? Ignoring me, she pushed for a vote to force me to leave. I stood up and calmly walked to the front of the room. Before we vote, I think people should know exactly what I'm doing in my garage. I plugged in my USB drive and opened a file showing my retirement certificate from the National Scientific Research Agency, where I worked for 25 years. I displayed my operating permit for developing organic fertilizers in collaboration with the state university. Then I switched to the HOA's financial reports, highlighting irregularities, $45,000 spent on landscaping upgrades last year, awarded to Scott Landscaping, which barely existed. In fact, it was registered under Thomas Scott's name, Pamela's brother. I played an audio recording of William's voice saying, "Just assign violations to him. I don't care what they are. We need him out of the neighborhood before the audit begins." Frank Miller, a young board member, proposed an independent audit. Others quickly agreed. Dorothy whispered, "You know they'll seek revenge, don't you?" "I'm counting on it," I smiled. "In fact, I'm banking on it." After the meeting, I called Haley to share everything that happened. She was emotional. "I can't believe you brought it all to light. This is what I always knew you could do." 2 weeks later, life became a bureaucratic nightmare. Inspections came constantly, utility bills spiked, and each morning brought new violation notices. Henry met me at a coffee shop 2 towns away and confirmed what I feared. William had personally called the planning department. "He wants you gone." I nodded. "Why focus so much on me? I'm just an old man who wants to grow tomatoes." Henry smiled sadly. "It's not what you're doing, Gordon. It's what you represent. You publicly challenged the Scott family and won. If people see you can do that without consequences, others might start following suit." Over the next week, I seemed subdued, even dismantling some equipment in my garage. Neighbors worried I was giving up. One evening, Andrew unexpectedly appeared on my porch. "I hear you're removing your equipment," he said, sounding troubled. "You can't give up, Mr. Reed." "Not now." I raised an eyebrow. "I thought you'd be pleased." "Your wife certainly would be." Andrew sighed. "I don't know who I am anymore. When I met Pamela, I admired her ambition. But it turned into something else, cold, cruel power." "Then why stay?" I asked. "Fear," he admitted. "And habit. When you live in darkness too long, you forget what light looks like." I nodded. But it's never too late to step out of the darkness. That Sunday, an emergency community meeting was called. William and Pamela announced a buyback offer. Scott Development would purchase homes at 10% above market value. But the catch was obvious. Anyone currently in violation wouldn't qualify. They were trying to buy out the entire neighborhood. I smiled slightly. I'd anticipated this move. When I returned home, Haley, Dorothy, and others gathered with me. "They're trying to buy everyone out," Haley said. "That's their way of getting rid of people like you." "They've made a huge mistake," I said, pulling out a container from a hidden compartment. "This one isn't for the lawn anymore." A week later, Maple Grove simmered in quiet chaos. People were divided, those eager to take the offer and those suspicious of the Scots' motives. Meanwhile, I stopped fighting the violation notices. I even welcomed inspectors in with tea and cookies. Dorothy worried I'd given up. "Who said I'm surrendering?" I smiled. "I'm simply stopping my fight against a rigged system. Instead, I'm creating a new one." What new system? This Sunday's community picnic at Maple Park. The Scotts always host it to impress city officials. This year, it's even more important with them trying to buy back houses. Exactly. On Sunday, I arrived modestly dressed, pushing a cart labeled reads organic fertilizer for greener lawns. Pamela greeted me coldly. What a surprise to see you here. I smiled. Couldn't miss our favorite event. Thought I'd introduce my new fertilizer line, for free. Later, during the water fountain show, I poured my formula into the tanks. The sprinklers activated, shooting jets of water into the air, and within seconds, the water turned pink, blue, green, and purple, matching the exact colors of Pamela's Jeep. Chaos ensued. William stood directly under the main sprinkler, drenched in colorful droplets. City officials, pristine tablecloths, and even Pamela's dress were ruined. I stood up, phone recording. Actually, I was asked to provide fertilizer for the grass. I did exactly that. And afterward, I think we should discuss how Pamela Scott and her family have harassed me for the past year just because I planted tomatoes in my garden. Haley stepped forward with a thick stack of documents. This is a class action lawsuit against Scott Development and Maple Grove HOA for multiple violations, including harassment, fraud, and abuse of power. Pamela screamed, "You can't do this. We own this town." No, Frank Miller from the HOA board said, stepping forward with city officials. Not anymore. Andrew eventually signed divorce papers in front of me and walked away without looking back. A month later, I sat on the porch of my new home, surrounded by friends and thriving tomato plants. Justice had bloomed not through anger, but through patience, strategy, and a little chemistry. Sometimes, the quietest person makes the most effective revolutionary. And sometimes, a simple tomato plant can start a revolution that brings down an entire corrupt system. We document the madness so you don't have to. Like, share, subscribe, and let BD's stories be your guide through the absurd.